Hello people of the internet, hopefully you all had a great week. My name is Colton Steiner and I am your host for the Siesta Podcast. If you are new to the show, the Siesta Podcast is a show where I dive into my favorite topics, whether it's about sports on a national level or on a regional level where I talk about the Browns or other teams I follow like Ohio State, the Indians, or stuff related in those areas. But I also like to talk about TV shows too, as well as some movies here and there. So I could discuss TV franchises such as Star Wars, Marvel, and other Pixar, Disney TV shows like that. But today's topics are going to be diving into the Super Bowl, and I will share my thoughts about the game, the halftime show, some of the commercials, and what I expect going into next year's football season. And I will also talk about my top 5 Pixar movies of all time. And first off, these are all just my opinions and thoughts on the situations I discuss. You have all right to your opinion, whether it's sports related or entertainment related. So first off, let's talk about that Super Bowl. Well, if you missed it, the Kansas City Chiefs laid an egg, only scoring 9 points, didn't even get into the end zone, and lost 31-9 to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, this game, I honestly was shocked about Kansas City's performance. I was expecting a much better game coming out of them, but let's talk about the elephant in the room, and that is Tom Brady getting his 7th Super Bowl ring. When you go to 10 Super Bowls and win 7, that's damn impressive, and it deserves to be recommended. And I want to get this out of the way. I am not a Brady fan, but he steps up to the plate, and he deserves to be in the talks as one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. Now, I want to keep this painfully clear. I don't want to say greatest players of all time, because I think it's incredibly hard to define the GOATs in football because there's so many aspects of the game that need to go right in order for your team to win. For one, the defense has to show up, the line has to block, and then the receivers have to catch the ball. There have been so many situations where you have a great quarterback, but nobody around him. Trust me, I know as a Browns fan where we've had a lot of talent on one side of the ball, we had one of the best offensive lines in football, and we still managed to be one of the worst teams in the league. So a lot of elements go into play when you're talking about the greatest player of all time, which is why I think when you talk about the GOATs, you have to keep them designated for their position. And Tom Brady, easily in the conversation as one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. And he's been on incredible teams too that have helped him out too. When I talk about greatest players, I mean, you look at that, I believe it was his first Super Bowl he lost. He had Randy Moss, and that offense alone was one of the best offenses to ever play football. So when you look at the overall aspects of a team, Tom Brady has been on great teams. I mean, that's definitely helped him win games and win those Super Bowls. So as I said, football is a team game. You have to show up as a team. Every aspect of the team has to show up and come to play in order for you to win that precious Lombardi trophy. But with that said, I mean, if you look at the roles in this Super Bowl, if Tom Brady was on Kansas City's team, I guarantee you he doesn't win this Super Bowl. Heck, I honestly think the score would be a lot different. I think Kansas City would score possibly a lot more points than Tampa Bay. It's just one of those situations. So it's so hard to tell because so many aspects play into effect when you're talking about the greatest players of all time. But let's talk about the game. Enough about Tom Brady. I know he's great. We all know he's great. But let's talk about the game. Overall thoughts, I was shocked. Like I said, I expected a much better outing from Kansas City than what I witnessed and what we all witnessed. I mean, for a Super Bowl, it was honestly pretty boring. You kept hoping that Kansas City, at least for me, I kept hoping they would do like a reverse Atlanta Falcons and come back and make this game closer, but it just never happened. And you got to look at what Kansas City was performing on the field. Patrick Mahomes literally had no help. Receivers weren't catching the ball. That includes Travis Kelce. I mean, he had a couple drops that were pretty key. And then the line wasn't blocking. And when you look at these situations, no quarterback can win with that. And I don't care who you are. When you look at the situation that Patrick Mahomes was in, he literally ran for over, at least to my knowledge, over 500 yards before throwing the ball or getting sacked, which I believe is a record. I don't think any quarterback has ever had to deal with that. And the crazy thing about the Super Bowl, you look at like the images, when he's literally diving forward, his legs are off the ground and he throws the ball into the end zone, hits his receiver in the face mask in the end zone, and just that image right there of him in the air, the way he was able to get the ball off was insane enough, but to actually throw an accurate pass in that situation to an open receiver and have him get hit in the helmet and just drop the ball is just a depressing thing as a Kansas City fan, or just as an average football fan, because you love seeing greatness happen. And when I say no QB can win with that, I'm particularly going after the national media. And I know I've done this a lot, but in this situation, they said Patrick Mahomes can't win with that and no QB can win with that. We all agree, but we just want them to be consistent on that. Earlier this year, when Baker Mayfield had no time to throw the ball, receivers were dropping the ball back and forth, they expected him to be better. Like, the crazy thing is the double standards, and you can clearly tell when they do this for certain teams like the Chiefs, Packers, the Buccaneers, or whoever Tom Brady's really playing for. There is always an excuse or a bailout for these quarterbacks, and I'm not defending that. I agree that sometimes quarterbacks don't get a fair rep, which is why I'm so adamant on Baker Mayfield getting a fair shot. Like, he always has some sort of, oh, well, he could have done this better, statement from the national media. And what it sickens me, because as a Browns fan, we have finally found our quarterback that has the best winning percentage in over 25 years, and we just need to keep with them, but the national media doesn't want us to succeed. So moving on from my little Browns rampant right there, let's go back to the Super Bowl. So Tampa Bay's defense in this game was just so menacing. I mean, they dominated the offensive line of Kansas City, and you could state that Kansas City were missing some key offensive linemen, which is a fair point. I mean, you're missing some key parts of your offense, and that definitely affects your game. But when you look at the secondary, they were covering their wide receivers very well. And you didn't see the offensive drive from Kansas City that we've seen in the past. And I believe Tampa Bay's defense was able to just neutralize that and play to their advantage and just shut them down. And hats off to the Tampa Bay defense. They played a tremendous game. And while Tom Brady did get the MVP, the defense as a whole, the defensive coordinator, Todd Bowles, definitely deserves some recognition for the way he was able to just call the right plays against Kansas City and shut down their offense. But the big thing that a lot of people took out of this game is the amount of penalties that Kansas City racked up. I mean, you look at the total they got for the game. They racked up 11 penalties for 120 yards. That is insane, and most of that came in the first half. I do believe they had 9 penalties for about 95 yards in the first half, which is a Super Bowl record. And a lot of those came on near the end of the half. 2 of them were pass interference calls, questionable definitely, and then another one was an unsportsmanlike conduct penalty on Tyrann Mathieu, or aka the Honey Badger. But I want to talk about those pass interference ones, and the first one, I can understand that being pass interference, but the problem I have with that is the spot penalties, and I've always had a huge problem with spot penalties when it comes to pass interference. First off, you should not benefit a team 40 plus yards on a play that may or may not have been made. We saw this in this game. Travis Kelce dropped a wide open pass. You can't always say, oh, they could have caught that pass. I mean, surely they most likely could have, but you can't say that with that defender interfering with that pass that they could have made that catch. I mean, that's why I'm always advocate 15-yard penalty seems fair to me. And that way you're not lofting the ball downfield, just praying and hoping for a pass interference call so you get 40 plus yards. I just don't think that's fair, especially to the defense. But I do want to address that second pass interference call, and I thought that was a very, very questionable pass interference call. I didn't think it was. If anything, I could see illegal contact or holding, For sure, I definitely think there was some sort of contact, but I don't believe that was pass interference. For one, the ball was not catchable. And this is where you get in a very tight situation, especially in the goal line, when the ball is thrown 10 yards above the receiver and you say, oh, he could have caught that. No, you can't jump 5 yards in the air. You just can't. I mean, it is what it is. It definitely a penalty, but it shouldn't have been pass interference. So moving on away from penalties, because I don't want to clog up this show complaining about penalties, because honestly, aside from those 3 penalties, I think it was a fairly officiated game. But if we look at next year, what does it look like for the other teams? Will we get a rematch next season? My answer? I don't think so. Kansas City as well as Tampa Bay will most likely see some core players leave going into next year because of free agency. Winning the Super Bowl is definitely a huge resume builder as an NFL player. So when you're looking to move on to other teams or maybe try and get more money, you can definitely use that. Hey, I played on a Super Bowl winning team. I know how to win a Super Bowl. I know what it takes to play in the Super Bowl. So when you're looking at this, I think there is going to be possibly different teams competing in the Super Bowl. And hopefully we don't get another Brady Super Bowl. Let's just say that right there. I know a lot of people want to see the greatness happen, but me personally, I'm sick of seeing Tom Brady, but that's just my personal opinion. But Kansas City, they showed that they were beatable this year, and Tampa Bay showed how to beat them, and Tampa Bay wasn't even all that great. I mean, I'm not trying to diss on their talent. They were really good, but they lost 5 games this season against teams they most likely should have beat, but they just didn't, because the other team showed up and knew how to beat them. And you can only maintain a sterile offense for so long when you don't have a great defense, and Tampa Bay proved that defenses win championships in this game. I mean, honestly, the offense of Tampa Bay really didn't impress me all that much. I think Kansas City's defense was just not prepared for this game. And when you look at potential, I'm going to be looking at potential AFC teams and then NFC teams for the Super Bowl. The first team, I think it's pretty obvious who I think will fight for a chance to play in the Super Bowl from the AFC side, and that is the Cleveland Browns. Okay, first off, they have one of the best offenses in the NFL, and if they can just build their defense this offseason, they're going to be a huge threat. I mean, they almost beat Kansas City. I know they didn't have Patrick Mahomes, but still, they almost beat Kansas City without a good defense. I mean, you look at their entire secondary, it was all second and third strings players, but they're definitely looking at players like former tight ends defensive end JJ Watt, as they have just released him. Yes, just released him. JJ Watt asked to be released, and the Houston Texans pretty much said, okay, we'll do that. And he has the right to choose whoever he wants to play for. And if the Browns are able to go out and sign him to a relatively fair deal, I would say, because I don't think he's worth a lot of money. I mean, you look at what he's done in the last couple of years, he really hasn't been a driving force for the Texans, and he's definitely suffered a lot of injuries over his career. So that is why, while I would love to get JJ Watt and add him to our defensive line opposite side of Myles Garrett, I don't want to overspend on him. And whether it's just a 1-year contract or maybe a 2-year contract, we'll see, because I don't think he has many years left in the tank. Great player, very respectable player, but don't overspend for him. There's other players you can get that are younger, that would definitely play a big impact on the defense that you don't have to spend over bunches and bunches of money for. But looking at the cornerback situation, there were also talks about getting Richard Sherman. I mean, he responded to CJ McCollum saying, hey, it's an option. I may look at going to play for the Cleveland Browns. And a cornerback is exactly what the Browns need. I mean, Denzel Ward, who has definitely dealt with injuries as well, he is good, don't get me wrong, but he can't do it all by himself. I mean, he needs another cornerback, and with Greedy Williams, you really don't know what his situation is like, whether he'll be the same type of player that he was before the nerve damage, so it's kind of a hit or miss with him. So getting Richard Sherman, that would be great. And when you have a player that is as experienced and a veteran like Richard Sherman, it'd be great to help build our secondary with a guy who knows how to play the game. And with us most likely drafting I would say maybe a linebacker if we get Richard Sherman, or maybe another defensive back or a safety at 26, they could learn a lot from him, and he'd be a solid piece for developing other players. So And the Browns have a lot of cap space too. I mean, they have, to my knowledge, we have $26 million worth of cap space going into next season, which is in the top 15, I believe. And that is going to be big, trying to figure out where the money goes, whether it's to players, whether it's to teams, players that we're trying to trade for. It's a big, complicated issue, and it's something you have to keep an eye on going into the future, because you don't want to overspend now and then not have enough money to re-sign great players on your offense like Baker Mayfield and Nick Chubb and Jarvis Landry and more of your offensive line. You definitely need to be able to prioritize the financial aspects of this game and be smart with it. So it's going to be an interesting offseason for the Browns, but they could definitely try and trade for Marshawn Lattimore as well, as he's on his last year of his contract. And the Saints are dealing with a lot of calorie sap issues, and with, like I said, with the money that the Browns have to spend, that's another option the Browns could go if they don't get Richard Sherman. But the Browns are definitely going to be a team competing for the Super Bowl on the AFC side. But moving on from them, the Buffalo Bills. I mean, we looked at what they saw this year with Josh Allen, and he's bloomed into one of the best quarterbacks in the league. I mean, none of us really saw that coming in the draft. I mean, he was probably going to be a middle of the road type player, maybe like a Ryan Tannehill, who's also grown into a really good player. But nobody expected Josh Allen to be this good. And if you did, I think you're lying. But the Bills also have a great defense too, so they're most certainly a team that could compete for the AFC in the Super Bowl. And then, of course, Kansas City. I mean, let's look at them. They have Patrick freaking Mahomes, who is one of the best quarterbacks, if not the best quarterback in the game right now. I mean, I love Baker Mayfield, but if the opportunity to trade him straight up for Patrick Mahomes, I know that's crazy, never going to happen, but I would do that in a heartbeat, definitely. I mean, I love that. I want to make this very clear. I love Baker Mayfield, but Patrick Mahomes is just in a level that no other quarterback is in. So that is why I want to state that Patrick Mahomes is a great player and the only quarterback I would ever trade Baker Mayfield for. But they're in a similar situation like the Browns. If they can build their defense a little bit more, then they certainly can go back and compete for another Super Bowl. So moving to the other side of the league and to the NFC, let's look at Green Bay, who is honestly my favorite team to come out of the NFC next year. I think they're like the Kansas City Chiefs and the Browns, they're in a similar position where if they can build their defense, they can be a serious threat. I mean, we saw what Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers did this season. That duo was just dominant. And once people were able to figure out how to stop them, they were kind of shut down a little bit. So if they can get one more receiver to help Devontae Adams, I think Green Bay definitely can be the favorite to come out of the NFC for the Super Bowl. But also, let's look at the LA Rams, as they've just landed a huge trade with Matt Stafford taking the helm as their quarterback. So it's going to be a fun, interesting year for the Rams because they do have Aaron Donald and they could make another Super Bowl run, as we saw them do that a couple of years ago. They did get dominated by the Patriots, but with Matt Stafford, I think they're in a little bit better of a situation. He's going to be a better quarterback in my position than Jared Goff. But they're intriguing. Don't count the LA Rams out. I think they're definitely going to be a threat for the Super Bowl. And moving on from them, like I said, in the first part in the AFC, Kansas City. In the NFC, you got Tampa Bay. I mean, they were dominant. You can't leave Tampa Bay out of this conversation as a projected Super Bowl contender. I mean, if they re-sign some key players this offseason, they certainly could make another run. They have a lot of cap space. They actually have more cap space available than the Cleveland Browns. So there's a lot to be interested in when you're looking at Tampa Bay and what they're able to do. So the crazy 2020 season is finally coming to a close with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers blowing out the Kansas City Chiefs in the Super Bowl 31-9. And when you look at the Super Bowl commercials and halftime show, there wasn't much going on. There were maybe a couple things here and there, but by far, in my opinion, the best commercial was the Toyota commercial that featured Paralympic swimmer and 13-time gold medalist Jessica Long in her adoption story. How it shows her as a kid with just overcoming huge obstacles and becoming the great athlete that she is. And if that doesn't bring a tear to your eye or just a smile to your face at the very least when you watch that commercial, you may not be human. It was just a very heartwarming commercial to watch. So that was my favorite one when it comes to the emotional side. On the comedic side, Eminem just dominated with their commercial. I freaking died watching it. It was hilarious, it was fun, and it's just stayed on point to what they're actually aimed to do with their marketing team. But those were my favorite commercials, and the halftime show was, I don't want to go overboard about it. I mean, I wasn't all for it, but I didn't hate it. I mean, I personally, I would love to see a country artist have the Super Bowl halftime show one of these years, and maybe that's why I'm more inclined to not enjoy some of these Super Bowl halftime shows, is because it's not in the genre that I appreciate and enjoy. And country artists would bring some great atmosphere and great entertainment. I mean, they have some of the most entertaining concerts that sell out big stadiums, and I think it'd definitely be a fun halftime show, whether Luke Combs is in there, maybe Eric Church, Carrie Underwood, and Kenny Chesney. And Eric Church did a stellar job with Jasmine Sullivan on the national anthem. I mean, that was absolutely beautiful. The guitar, it was top of the line, and I very much enjoyed it. But moving on from the Super Bowl, we're going to be discussing my top 5 favorite Pixar movies. And there are some good Pixar movies. Let's get this out of the way. But I'm only going to be listing one movie from each franchise. So I'm only going to be listing one of the movies in my top 5 from Toy Story, one from Cars, Finding Nemo, stuff like that. But I'm also going to be mentioning honorable mentions that just missed the list. So starting off with those honorable mentions, we have Toy Story 2. And honestly, right out of the gate, this is one of my favorite Pixar movies ever. And it's right behind Toy Story. And if I didn't have my limitations and only list one from each franchise, this movie more than likely would have made the list. But this has some of my favorite moments with the toys crossing the road. Every time that makes me laugh, it never gets old. The storyline is great, has some iconic moments, and it introduces some amazing characters with Jessie, Bullseye, and the Prospector. So who loves these characters? Oh, and it also has Mrs. Potato Head too, so there's some more characters in here that I enjoy. But another honorable mention is Cars 3. Now, I think the National Review didn't really give this a fair chance, but it definitely eliminates the car-tastrophe / car wreck that was Cars 2. Now, Cars 2 is one of the most profound Pixar movies that you can say is the worst movie of all time when it comes to Pixar. But it has the exact same feel that the original Cars had, and which is why I really enjoy it. And it shows what can happen when a mentee becomes a mentor, with Lightning McQueen taking over as the mentor for Cruz Ramirez. I mean, that was a very enjoyable aspect of the movie, and it shows what giving up the reins and handing him over to the next generation means to some of these other people. And it's definitely relatable. I mean, you think about sports, I mean, NASCAR too, it's amazing to see the turnover when you see some of the greatest of all time retire and then the new people come on the block. And when you look at the first Cars, Lightning McQueen was that new rookie on the block. He just kind of comes in and replaces the people before him, and now he's having to experience that aspect. So I love that element of it. In the final scene, I mean, my favorite scene from this movie was where they show Doc and Lightning on the wall, and then with Doc as the mentor and Lightning as the mentee, and then Lightning and then Cruz in the same picture with Lightning wearing Doc's colors. It makes a smile to my face every time I see it. But moving on from Cars 3 to Finding Nemo, who just missed a list, it's an amazing story. I mean, it definitely is touching and relatable that you don't want to see the ones you love leave the nest and move on to the next part of life, and you want to keep them safe and keep them close to where you are at so they don't get in trouble, don't grow up and stuff like that. But I am not a dad, but it's something I've seen firsthand, and it's definitely hard to witness your little ones growing up. So Finding Nemo is just a great story about a guy doing whatever it takes to find his son and get him back home. And while it is a great Pixar movie, it just missed the list. So moving on to the top 5. At number 5, we have A Bug's Life. And number 5 and 4 have, in my opinion, very similar character development traits. I mean, it's all about being yourself isn't bad and trying to do what you can to succeed and show what you are worth. But it's just a great story, and don't to not fall under the power of the strong. And to stand up for your freedom, I mean, one of my favorite scenes from this movie is when Flick is getting beat up by Hopper and he just stands up to him and says, "Ants don't serve grasshoppers." And he defends his colony, and it's just a great moment. You see the character development that he's finally able to stand up for what his colony has been suffering for. I don't even know how long they were suffering under the realm of the grasshoppers, but he's finally making the difference that he has wanted to make. And it's just a great character build-up moment that you've been waiting the entire movie for. And the other ants finally realize this, stand up to the grasshoppers, and they finally are able to serve themselves and live the freedom that they so desperately deserved. But next on the list, we have Ratatouille. And this is such a great story about something I never thought could go together. A rat in a former 5-star restaurants. I mean, it sends a great message about working together as a team and as a family and sticking together. It's such a great movie, in my opinion. I know people aren't really comfortable with the rat part of it, but it's still fun. I mean, he washes his little hands, and it just serves up as a purpose that anyone can cook. I mean, it's a movie that makes you want to try and actually be a cook. Like, if you watch this movie and say, "Oh, I don't want to try that," I don't think you really are a big fan of the movie. But this is just another great job by Pixar that just shows that supporting family and helping each other out and doing something that you're not even knowledgeable in, that if you work together as a family, you can succeed and run a great kitchen. But my favorite part of this movie is not the end, but actually one of the first parts of the movie is when Remy finally gets his chance to cook. And it's when he's escaping the kitchen and he notices Linguini's dish is absolutely atrocious. Then he fixes it up, and then they serve his dish to a critic unknowingly, and they review it as a great dish. And you just see the spark just kind of light inside him. This is something I can do. And honestly, there are so many great moments from this movie. This is just one of them. So I highly recommend you give this movie a shot. But moving on to number 3, and we have Cars. And honestly, this movie shows a fantastic transformation from an arrogant D-bag to a humbled racer. And that is Lightning McQueen. I mean, it's such an entertaining opening. You have Sheryl Crow coming in with Rio Gone and Lightning McQueen getting ready to race. And you see the flashes of race cars and then the silence and then the flashes of race cars again. And then right when Lightning ready, then you hear the intro of the song. It's just so good. Loved every minute of this movie. And at the end, it's not the desire for fame anymore. It's just a desire to love the sport. And Tex says it at the end, "Lightning, there's more than racing than just winning." And it's such a great moment when Lightning figures out Doc Hudson's past, when he says, "Why did you give up after your crash?" And he says, "I didn't give up. They gave up on me." And when he shares what happened to him and his story, it opens Lightning eyes to there's more than life than just racing. And you see this a couple times throughout the movie when his agent tells him he has 20 tickets for him for the next race and for his friends and family, but he doesn't have anybody because he's all about himself. And Doc Hudson realizes that he's just another race car, one of the race cars that replaced him when he was near the end of his career. So this was a great moment for Lightning McQueen and just seeing him develop into a great race car driver and what the town of Radiator Springs meant to him at the end. I mean, he couldn't even focus on racing because he missed that town and his friends that he had grown to love. So my favorite scene by far is the ending when he's about to win the Piston Cup, the first rookie ever to win, but he slams on the brake after Chick Hicks does a nasty move on the King and sends the King flying through the air and crashing out. And then Lightning, right about to win, he sees on the Jumbotron the king, and he just doesn't want him to go out like Doc Hudson. So he slams on the brake. Chick Hicks wins the Piston Cup. He goes back and helps the king finish his last race. And that just puts a smile on your face, because that is how a perfect movie is supposed to go. A person who was so arrogant and so selfish that nobody saw him any different, and then he realized he needed to change. And by the end of the movie, he does a thing that you never expected him to do when you first saw him on screen. And that is just brilliant character development. And honestly, this movie is one of the best movies Pixar has ever made. And it's just a fun concept too. I mean, talking cars, what's more fun than that? So moving on to number 2, we have Monsters, Inc. And it is a unique take talking about monsters in your closet and what really goes on. I mean, as a kid, I remember the darkness of my closet. I was like, there's gotta be something in there, even though it's kind of a crazy concept. But you never know. It's just so fun to see John Goodman and Billy Crystal team up as the best friends you know to love. And their relationship with Boo and trying to get her back to her world while forming that bond with her, it's just so touching. And it's the comedic aspects of this movie are top notch, and they're just a great duo. And when you look at these next two, I think duo is the best part of it. And it's just a fun family film that'll bring a tear to your eye at the end. And my favorite scene from this movie is by far the end of it, when Mike fixes Boo's door because he knows Sully misses Boo, and he fixes the door, and it just warms your heart. And he's like, there was a lot of wood to go through, and he has a lot of cuts and scrapes, and probably a lot of good splinters there too. But you see the relationship that those two friends have, and while there was a lot of moments from the movie that could have put their friendship at risk, but they knew at the end of the day that they didn't have nothing if they didn't have each other. And it's so interesting to see. Monsters, Inc. is all about scares and getting screams from the kids, but little did they realize that laughter was 3 times more powerful than screams. And it's just a fun little twist there. You think monsters are so scary, maybe they're actually there to bring you comedic effect and comedic value. You never know. But I love Monsters, Inc. Highly recommend. I've seen it so many times, and I cannot wait for their new show, Monsters at Work, which is going to release on Disney+, I believe in 2021, or maybe it'll be delayed until 2022. We will see. But moving on from that, we have my favorite, the number 1 on this list, Toy Story 3. And this honestly goes into one of my favorite movies of all time. I mean, I love this movie as a kid. I saw it when I was 14. I saw it in theaters. It released in 2010, but I love it even more now as an adult. I mean, first off, it's an end of an era. Indy giving his toys to Bonnie at the very end was such a moving moment. And this is a movie you grow up as an adult. You don't really realize it as a kid, but more so as an adult, you grow up from your toys and you don't use them as much, but it kind of opened your eyes like, these toys actually did make an impact on me. And if you're listening to this podcast, I guarantee if I'm talking about a toy now, in the back of your mind, actually, or to the front of your mind, you're thinking of a toy that made an impact on you as a kid that you love playing with, and you're thinking about that right now and you miss playing with that. And it's just an interesting aspect from this movie. I mean, the first 2 movies, Toy Story 1 and Toy Story 2, had the whole aspect of getting a new toy and the toy feeling replaced from Toy Story 1, and then Toy Story 2, where you got the sense that, oh, I'm ripped, I'm going to be just replaced again. And now Toy Story 3 is just the aspect of growing up, and that's what I really love. And when they're about to burn in that fire, all these toys have kind of grown together as a family, and they're all holding each other's hands, and then the claw comes and picks them up, and you know they're going to survive. So that's great. But then at the end, when Andy gives his toys to Bonnie, in a sense, you're also saying so long, partner, to Andy. I mean, you in a sense are the toy there, and you're saying goodbye. You've seen Andy grow up, and we all feel like Andy sometimes. So that's what I loved about this. And let's get this out of the way. Like Monsters, Inc., Toy Story 3 has an iconic duo with Tim Allen and Tom Hanks. And at the end, when you see Andy drive off, I also get a little bit emotional because it's just so sad that you say goodbye to Andy after 2 fantastic movies. And I love the Toy Story franchise. 1, 2, and 3. If I had to rank them, I'd rank number 3 at the top, 2 right behind it, and honestly, based on the rules I set for myself in this top 5 category, I probably would have Toy Story 2 ranked at number 2, right behind Toy Story 3. But in the scheme of Toy Story, like I said, Toy Story 3 at number 1, Toy Story 2 right behind it, then the original Toy Story, and then Toy Story 4 at the bottom. I wasn't a big fan of Toy Story 4, but that's a topic for another day. So I love Pixar. They don't throw these films together. They work on them for years before they release them, and they hit the nail on the head every single time. There are rare cases when they make bad movies. I mean, they're extremely rare. But for the most part, they make amazing movies that, one, tug at the viewer's emotional side. I mean, you can relate to the characters. Even if it's like the most absurd thing ever, you relate to them. The audience can form a bond with these characters, even if they're, whether it's toys, whether it's a monster, whether it's a dog, whether it's an ant. The greatest thing that Pixar does is relating to its viewers. And I'm always eager for a Pixar movie because they always know how to make fantastic stories. So thank you guys for listening. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. Make sure to follow the show on Spotify and subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts. So thank you guys for listening, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!